In today's chess lesson, I'm going to reveal a dangerous opening trap for black that can catch many opponents by surprise. The game begins with pawn to e4, pawn to a5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and then bishop to c4. White has entered the Italian game, one of the most common opening setups in chess. Black responds with bishop to c5. White now has several natural options. They can play pawn to c3 to strengthen their control of the center, castle to improve king safety, or choose pawn to d3 to support the pawn on e4 and open the diagonal for the bishop. This last move is exactly what black is hoping for because it allows the aggressive Lucchini Gambit with pawn to f5. Many players continue with knight to g5, eyeing the weak f7 square and threatening a fried liver-style attack. Black calmly pushes the pawn forward, attacking the knight and restricting the bishop. White often jumps in with knight to f7, believing they have won material by forking the queen and rook. But black has a powerful surprise: queen to h4. If white greedily captures the rook, black immediately responds with queen to f2 checkmate. Since taking the rook loses on the spot, white usually castles to escape the mating threat. Black then develops with knight to f6. Now the rook is hanging, and white is almost forced to capture it. However, black's attack is already in full swing. The threat of queen to h2 checkmate is becoming very dangerous. White's best defensive try is pawn to h3, but black strikes with the brilliant sacrifice knight takes f2. The white queen comes under attack, and black's pieces flood toward the king. If white captures the knight, black simply recaptures with the queen and keeps the initiative. Should white's king retreat toward the corner, black opens the position with a central pawn break. White has different ways to respond, but none are enough. If the queen captures, queen to g1 is checkmate. If the pawn captures, pawn to d5 attacks the bishop and activates black's pieces, leaving white under overwhelming pressure. Let's also examine another possibility. Instead of moving the king to the corner, white may choose king to h2. Black again plays pawn to d5. White captures the pawn with the bishop, and black finds the stunning move bishop to g4. The queen is attacked, but moving it away allows queen to g1 checkmate. Capturing the bishop is no solution either because queen to h4 delivers mate. Finally, suppose white ignores the rook completely and moves the queen. Black still has a beautiful tactical finish. Knight to h3 gives a double check, forcing the king to move. Then knight to f2 delivers another double check, driving the king toward g1. With no escape available, queen to h1 ends the game with checkmate. Absolutely brilliant. But the story doesn't end there. Let's return to this position. We've already seen how white gets punished after castling, but what if white tries pawn to g3 instead? Black simply moves the queen to safety. Feeling secure, white usually grabs the rook. That's exactly when black launches the attack with pawn to d5, opening the center and bringing the bishop into the game with tempo against the queen. If white blocks the attack, black captures on g3 and begins tearing apart the king side. A timely bishop sacrifice followed by pawn to g2 creates an unstoppable threat. White's rook becomes trapped, and black's pieces flood into the attack. White's king simply cannot survive for long. If white chooses to move the queen instead of blocking, black continues developing the attack. The knight joins the action, dangerous forks begin to appear, and queen to g2 becomes a major threat. With both bishops aiming at the king, white's position quickly falls apart. Now let's return to the Italian game. After bishop to c5, black plays pawn to f5, entering the aggressive Lucchini Gambit. We've already looked at several winning traps when white attacks with the knight. The key ideas are simple: push pawn to f4, activate the queen, develop the knight aggressively, strike in the center with pawn to d5, and bring the light-squared bishop into the attack. Following these principles can lead to devastating attacks against an unprepared opponent. But what if white changes course? Instead of jumping in with the knight, white may give check with the bishop after pawn to f4. In that case, black calmly responds with king to f8. Suddenly, white's knight is awkwardly placed and cannot move without abandoning the bishop, giving black excellent attacking chances going forward. If white decides to exchange pieces in this position, black should avoid the obvious recapture. Instead of immediately taking the bishop, black first captures the knight. This small detail makes a huge difference. Once the bishop retreats, black can focus entirely on building a dangerous attack against white's king side. The initiative remains firmly in black's hands, and according to engine analysis, black enjoys an advantage of nearly 4 points. Of course, stronger opponents will often look for a more solid defense. One natural idea is to protect the knight with the queen. If white places the queen on h5, black can simply challenge it and gain time while bringing more pieces into the game. Another possibility is pawn to h4, but black responds by attacking the knight once again, forcing white to spend valuable time defending. After the resulting exchanges, black often emerges with an extra pawn and a more active position. Even though black may no longer be able to castle, the lead in development and attacking opportunities more than compensate. The engine still gives black a comfortable advantage of around plus 2.5. Now let's rewind and examine another important variation. Some players may decide not to enter any tactical complications and simply accept the gambit pawn. In that case, black immediately begins fighting for central control and prepares to recover the sacrifice pawn later. White's most natural move is often bishop to b5. This develops the bishop, pins the knight, and increases pressure on the e5 pawn. At first glance, it looks unpleasant for black. However, instead of worrying about the pawn, black focuses on rapid development and plays knight to e7. White will usually capture the pawn on e5, but black remains calm and castles kingside. This is a very important moment. Black has secured the king and connected the rooks, while white is still lagging behind in development. Since the knight is no longer pinned, white will often exchange it by capturing on c6. Black recaptures with the pawn, strengthening central control. White's bishop then retreats, and suddenly black's pieces are perfectly placed for a powerful attack. Here's where the position becomes especially dangerous. Rather than slowly improving the position, black can consider a bishop sacrifice to expose white's king. White is usually forced to accept the sacrifice, after which black wins back the pawn and begins mobilizing every piece toward the enemy king. The key concept is development. Even if black has temporarily sacrificed material, white has spent too much time grabbing pawns while neglecting development. Black's queen, bishops, knights, and rooks quickly spring into action, creating one threat after another. Engine analysis shows that black's initiative is so strong that the position is evaluated at nearly plus 4.5. After seeing all of these attacking ideas, you might be asking an important question. What is the correct way for white to handle this opening? Let's go back to the beginning. The Lucchini Gambit can arise through different move orders. For example, instead of developing the bishop first, black can immediately play pawn to f5. This is known as the Rousseau Gambit. If white accepts the pawn, black pushes pawn to e4, gaining space and forcing the knight to move again. However, many players prefer a quieter approach and simply play pawn to d3. This often transposes into familiar Lucchini Gambit positions. The biggest mistake white can make is assuming that black's aggressive setup must be punished immediately. Many players become overly ambitious and start searching for tactical attacks from the opening. Ironically, this is exactly what black wants. The strongest strategy for white is often the simplest one. Castle early, complete development, control the center, and avoid unnecessary complications. By remaining patient, white can neutralize many of black's tactical ideas before they become dangerous. On the other hand, if white chooses a solid setup, black should also focus on good fundamentals, develop the minor pieces, activate the bishops, improve king safety, and gradually increase pressure. One particularly useful maneuver is knight to a5. This move attacks the bishop on c4 and limits its available squares. White exchanges the knight, now white's bishop can suddenly find itself short of safe retreats. Black can respond with pawn to c6, and the bishop may become trapped later in the game. According to Stockfish, many of these positions are objectively equal when both sides play accurately. That means black doesn't need a winning trap to get a good game. Even if white knows all the theory and avoids every tactical trick, black still reaches an active and playable position with excellent practical chances.